I'll tell a story, but I first want to actually, in just a few minutes, probably answer a big chunk of the questions that you asked. So in the form that you submitted, you asked a question, and quite chunk of them I'm going to explain immediately. Which is actually why you should not use less or should not do less. And so the first one, probably the most important one, is that if you have one collocated team which delivers a product for customer, keep it like that. So that was actually one of the questions also from Jim. Should you avoid the technical debt? His question, I forgot, I couldn't see anymore. So his question was, isn't this scaling an organization a bit like removing technical debt? It's better not to get there in the first place. Absolutely. So less is not meant to add more teams. I mean, there are companies which have tried to do that, and they wanted to do that with less, but it's absolutely not meant for. And that's not how we teach it. That's not the message that is being given, etc. Second one is that you need to think too much and be very patient. So these statements, by the way, from my experience of introducing less in many companies, I noticed these are the things why people actually shouldn't be doing less. And seriously, so too many people have trouble actually thinking enough and thinking too much. So at some point they get impatient, they just want to do something, and they want to change everything what has been piled up in a years of dysfunction in a 1 year or less. That doesn't make much sense. You cannot change things for the better in such a short time. It's hard. It's very hard. It's also very painful. In fact, actually, it's kind of designed to be painful, same as Scrum, basically. And it's designed to expose the problems, expose the rocks, as we say it. And once you see the rocks, then you can deal with that. But how this is usually being perceived, especially by people who don't understand what's really going on or what less is, they just see the less came and suddenly everything is painful. So you have to understand, you have to be kind of knowledgeable about what exactly am I seeing here. It's also likely to fail for big part for the reasons that I just mentioned before, because it's so hard. People compromise, companies compromise. They don't really want to change, but it sounds so good what Les says. So probably also to you, it's going to sound very good, what I'm going to explain. It's so obvious, it's so clear. And then you become very enthusiastic, you jump upon it, just to realize that it's way harder than it looks. Nevertheless, is it bad to fail with less? Not really, because you're going to learn a lot about product development, I noticed. It goes same for me. You was fake Scrum, don't do it, because you're going to realize that you faked it. And less is going to kind of help you realize that, because it's really impossible to do anything meaningful in less without understanding and doing Scrum properly. It's less popular. There is less easy money to make. It's more difficult to become a useful coach and trainer. If you look at towards less as some kind of a thing, if you jump on it and see it as a job or something like that, it's not really wise, and for these reasons. So it's not really meant to make me or other trainers and coaches rich, although we don't complain about the payment that we get. But most companies don't really want less because they want Agile without changing much. And you get this situation that you in the beginning get into organization, and then the discussion just keeps going on and on and on about, do you actually really want to change much? And they don't really want to. And the last one, which is the only kind of a good part, is because you're already doing it less. So that happens actually quite often. It sounds remarkable, but I think half of the less adoptions were the people who just understood Scrum really, really well, and say they adopted Scrum and they use it for working with multiple teams. And they applied a proper Scrum basically, and they came out to the situation which boils down to the LeSS. So what is normally done in LeSS. This happened to me too. I didn't know about the LeSS, but didn't know about the LeSS books, etc. When I did my first LeSS adoption, basically, we didn't even call it LeSS. We just called it Scrum, basically. So let me tell you a story first. So I'm going to take a big, I'm going to take a time to actually give you a lots of background in order to get to the point so that you understand really properly what LeSS is all about. So I came originally from Bosnia, so that's where I'm born. And so when I was about 15 years old, I think, what happened is that I loved software development already, so I played with software. And around that time, 15 years old, a company asked me to make something, to deliver. And so I'm obviously very nervous about it, and so I thought, this company asked me to build software. Gee, that's something. So I'm clueless. I'm very much aware that I have no idea what I'm exactly doing, but I know how to write code. That's for sure. But whether it makes sense, whether it's good, whether they're going to use it, whether it's going to achieve the goal, any kind of a goal, I have no idea. So that made me very, very nervous. So what happened is that I really wanted to, as soon as I started, to actually get something done in order to get the answer whether it makes sense. I wasn't expecting actually to get it's well done or anything like that. I just want to figure out, I want to learn what I'm doing actually wrong and how come. I just barely started writing code, so I'm very insecure about that. And so I spent about 2 weeks, accidentally, it's kind of a similar to sprint, and brought it to the users, to the company, and showed them what I've actually built. And then what happened is they gave me feedback. They showed me how they would use that, and it was remarkable to see that. And I learned really a lot from those moments. I suddenly noticed that their way of looking at software is very different from mine. And so this was extremely valuable. So I did one more iteration after that, and it was done. And they said, thank you. And this was in Bosnia, and this was quite a long time ago. That's actually before the war that happened there. And it was, the software was very expensive. That's why they didn't ask anybody else. They asked me because I was cheap. And so with thank you, that was for me more than enough. They also gave me some money, which was inflation time at that time in Bosnia. So which means that we got a box of money, which I gave to my mom, and basically did nothing with it. So it wasn't really useful to me. This thank you hit me really hard, because what made it so powerful for me was to build something which somebody finds it useful. And so I love writing software, but it makes it 10 times more pleasurable if you know that it's actually used. So somebody benefits by it. There is some kind of a contribution to somebody else. And so war happened. I ended up in Netherlands, and obviously I'm just started to learn Dutch and go to school and computer science. And so after 2 years, there was 1997, 1998, it was a booming time. Everybody was searching for software developers. So I ended up in a company, and you are basically in a no time rich for me, because I came from Bosnia. And because I was one of the few people who actually knew how to write software, relatively one of the few people, because there was a huge shortage for software engineers at that time. So they immediately started to praise me and tell me, go for it, you can be an architect. So before I knew, I became an architect. Well, that was very nice. I had a nice lease car, nice salary. And architect, if you are not careful, you are considered like, you see yourself like a god, you know, somebody who stands above and has a helicopter view, as they say it. And so you start to preach and start to tell people how much you know better how to do actually stuff than anybody else, because you are architect and they are not. It went on like that, and at some point I get to the manager, and I gave my architectural picture, and this manager says, looks at it and says also thank you. but it didn't feel right. Didn't feel right whatsoever. It was actually a pretty bad feeling. And then I started to realize this is not good. It doesn't make much sense. I see my profession really differently. And which boils down to that software development is a profession where we have no idea what we are doing, and we need a mechanism which somehow tell us that we are completely wrong. And so you need to be humble enough to listen to that and realize, so that you can learn in the process. And if you do that often enough, then something good might happen. And at least you figure out you're going to do it a bit less bad. That's basically it. So this is how I saw my profession and still see it like that. So along these lines, I figured out that Scrum is basically the same thing. And that you learn continuously in iterations, the fast way, and you figure out that you did something wrong. And great. So I love Scrum immediately, and XP. Great. So I went to the small companies and I start to preach Scrum, 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 Scrum. And it worked in smaller companies, small groups, like one or maybe two teams, usually just one team. And it worked marvelously. But then before you know, you are being sent to a very large company, and lots of them, and these companies then started also say we want to have a Scrum. I was still called architect and etc. But I was very much bringing that in a more iterative way, more from an Agile point of view already. And so I start to tell them also Scrum, 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 Scrum. So imagine you're coming to a big bank which has 4 different layers of application landscape, like a front office, mid office, back office, lots of teams. Most teams and most people actually never saw the customer or even users. They are working on some kind of a component in a backend or a database or whatever. And then you say Scrum. And then they ask you, what the heck is Scrum? Well, Scrum is a team. Scrum is actually a way to deliver, helps you to deliver a product. And so how does it work? You have a group of people called a team, and that team communicates directly with the customer, and they deliver iteratively. So they deliver this together, basically. And they deliver the actual customer feature. So something that the customer and users can use it. So they, what happens is that they look at you back and they say like, what the heck are you talking about? Because it doesn't make any sense for us. I mean, that sounds good in paper, but it's a utopia. And besides, we are dealing with something way more complex. You cannot do it just like that. So we are working on this one component. And for us, another team is actually, which is going to use this component in their component. And so can we call them a customer? And then, no, that doesn't make any sense. So they are clearly not a customer. They're just another team. And then that's how it went. It was just painful, and it didn't fly. They didn't buy the message, and I also didn't actually have a proper message. And so what happens then, and this is really important when it comes to positioning of LeSS, is that the companies need to make a choice. So a choice that is one choice they can make is that they look at their organization and look at the Scrum and say, well, we are very complicated and stuff. So the option is that we fire most of the people, and so end up with one or a few teams or something like that. And then we can do Scrum. That's one option. Second option is, so the first option, as you know, probably is not really a good option. Nobody really takes that option. So there might be some cases where it's actually happened, but it's not so common. It's not easy at all, at least not in my experience. And second option, and that's a very, very, very common option, is that they say, well, you know what, this Agile thing, what everybody says, it seems to be the success factor in Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. So we want it also. So, but you know what, since it doesn't fit our needs, we need to change it to make it fit our need. So you have basically a dysfunctional organization which is unable to deliver anything anytime soon, and they take Scrum and then smash it so much into nothing that it actually works in their situation, but it doesn't bring any change whatsoever. It just looks pretty there. And so now I'm talking about Scrum. But what happened in a past decade or so is that there is a whole range of frameworks came up on top of the smashed up Scrum to make sure that you can call yourself Agile, and without changing much, without fundamentally changing organization. So you have these two options. One is, downsize your company big time, remove all kinds of stuff, etc., and in one go, and then you can do Scrum, which barely nobody actually does. And the second one is fake it, okay? And some say fake it until you make it. You know, if you take small steps, then eventually it's going to be good somehow. Never really happens. That's an illusion that we keep telling ourselves. And then is a third option. So this is fortunately, it's a false dichotomy. Either you actually simplify your whole organization, or you start to fake it completely. There is also a third one, which is that you somehow, that you keep true to the core essence of Scrum and what Agile principles are also all about, and have a way of looking at your system, organizational system, which is on a path of descaling, of simplifying. So you're not doing something dramatic anytime soon, but you are setting the organization on a certain path. And that path is one of the key messages in that path, and is the simplification, is the descaling. So ensuring that you benefit by Scrum and Agile principles without either disturbing the whole organization into the ground or not really changing anything at the end. You can move forward, but you move forward in a different direction, in direction which actually is and this talk is going to be what it exactly means. So how do organization can be simplified in a practical manner? What does it actually mean? Okay, so as you noticed already, I haven't said yet anything about LeSS, and that's also one of the points. So for these 2 hours, we're going to talk about how to do product development in organizations, and LeSS is just a label to it. So the first thing about it is that we have you have a small organizations which become larger at some point, and so the question is, how come small organizations become larger? How come they become so damn complicated in the first place? Well, it's because of the way of thinking in organizations. What is so wrong about that? What goes wrong? Well, the first thing what goes wrong is that whenever a manager sees a problem, and let's say they see a problem, we take a bunch of developers, 20 developers or something, and we tell the developers, please deliver a product at the end of the year. So what happens at the end of the year? Well, nothing probably. They're still going to debate with each other that still lots of technical things need to happen. So we have a problem there, CEO says. So the CEO says, I need somebody to make sure that there is that people stick to the deadlines and they stick to the scope and constraints. So how do we call that person? We call it project manager, usually. So we introduce project manager. Project manager needs to ensure that everybody sticks to the deadline and something's been delivered at the end. Okay, the problem solved. They stick to the deadline. And if the problem is not solved, you hire a project manager, you hire a new one, which does make sure that things are delivered on time. And then we have a next problem. Next problem is you deliver something, but it crashes all the time at the user's hands. A user complains about it. Your CEO is really upset and says, I need to solve this problem. How do we solve the problem? Well, we appoint a QA, a tester, which needs to ensure that things are validated before they go to the customer. So the problem gets solved, obviously. Next problem. Well, we delivered something to the customer, but the customer doesn't actually want what has been delivered. So basically, the need is misunderstood. So what do? We need somebody who's actually a human being, not engineers. They don't really don't understand actual people. So we need business analysts. So those are human beings. So they can understand others. And problem gets solved. There is a better understanding of the needs. That's how it goes on and on and on. And so we keep introducing these roles. We keep introducing these processes, positions, policies, until we realize what's actually going on. The things become larger and larger, and the pattern is as follows: for every blah blah problem, a blah blah role, process, department, manager is appointed. This is a very common thinking in organizations. So basically, the management typically looks at the problems and they want to solve the problem, and they go problem by problem by problem by problem. And they get solved, and they get praised for it, they get promotion for it. And so you get this whole structure, which is a result of this thinking. No organization, no CEO has woken up in the morning and says, I want to make a very complicated organizational structure. That doesn't happen. So instead, what happens is this thinking, which ends up in this consequence that things become complicated simply because of the way how they approach it. We call this local optimization. Okay, so we think locally, we act locally, and so because it's easier, it's much easier to solve the problem in front of you than solving the problem in connection with each other. So, and for example, instead of, if you have a crashing system, instead of thinking like, oh, bloody hell, nobody takes care of the testing, we need to have a QA or a tester, you know what? We need to ask ourselves, how come developers are delivering this buggy code? How come is this happening actually? Do we understand why is this happening? So you could say, who cares? I mean, they solve problems locally, so at least the problems are solved. Well, what happens is that overall complexity increases a lot. Because of this thinking, things become very, very complicated. And at some point, they wake up in the morning and they look around and they see that other companies are doing stuff much better than they do. They even the simple stuff, it takes them the bunch of half a year to deliver at least, or a year or whatever. And so everything is so damn complicated. It requires lots of people, lots of time, and lots of money. And so they think, what exactly are the other companies actually doing? So they look around and they see, hey, they're doing Agile. Oh, great, let's do Agile, apply Agile. So what happens is that they basically they take this, let's say, a bucket of color, and this bucket of color is called Agile. And then they splash this color over the whole organization. And so which means that everything gets renamed into very cool names. So we don't have teams, we have suddenly squads and chapters and guilds and tribes. And we have suddenly train engineers and trains and everything is Agile portfolio, Agile project manager, Agile architect, Agile, everything is suddenly Agile. So this is what I call, colorization of your organization into agility. No agility happens, obviously. It just looks pretty, essentially, okay? So this is a problem. This is what's been going on for a long, long time. The problem is also, and this is a huge challenge, is that every system is, as Denning said, is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. So if you don't change the system, you cannot expect a different result. Okay, and another one is a very common statement is, you know what, we need to change a culture. The mindset needs to be different. I'm usually not a fan of this kind of a statement. The mindset needs to be different because it doesn't in reality mean anything much. so what we need to look at and understand is how come the certain culture exists in the first place. So the big reason, one of the major reasons why there is a certain culture is because of the structure that is put in place. So unless you change the structure, don't expect any kind of a so-called agile mindset. So the structure has to be changed. It's also other way around, by the way. So there has to be a certain culture in order to get a certain structure. But in LeSS context, this is a really crucial one. So what does it mean, changing the structure? It means that we bring the teams closer to customer. And so this is kind of a bit of a simplification of what it is all about. But it kind of boils down to this starting point. So it's all about the teams and how do we bring those teams closer to the customer. Let me get to the Scrum. So what is actually essence of Scrum? So there is many different explanations of that. And or is it some kind of a sound? So there's many different explanations of that, and Jim Coplin can give you a probably much better one. But Buzz Fuller has published this one in a recent blog post. So I'm going to just read it out loud. It's a bit awkward, but anyway. There is a customer who has a problem that is worth solving and that can probably be solved by developing a product. To help that customer, we put together a team of people who together have or can acquire the skills needed to build that product. This team interacts directly with the real customer to better understand the problem. Together, the customer and the team decide on the most important first steps in solving the larger problem. The team develops a small, usable product in a short, fixed time to take that first step, solving a small part of the problem. Having reached the end of that first period of time, the team reflects on how they worked and determines how to improve that. The team and the customer play with what was created and together choose the best next step. Off they go. The cycle continues until there is no more problem to solve. Okay, so this is really important because it underpins also the LeSS. So we want to stick to this when talking about LeSS too, no matter how hard it seems in large organizations. So the key thing, and I mentioned already, is descaling. So very often the question is being asked, how can we apply Agile at scale in our big complex organization? So there's basically a wrong question to ask. The question should not be asked in the first place. Because the problem is traditional large groups are complicated, not because they need to be, but because their organizational design creates an illusion of necessary complexity. So the better question would be, how can we simplify the necessarily big and complex organization design and be agile rather than do agile? Okay. So we want to reduce this complexity by dissolving unnecessarily complex organizational solutions and solve them in simpler ways. Now we are touching deeper and deeper the core, what LeSS is all about. Okay. So it's actually about descaling. So why is it called actually large scale Scrum? How come it's called like that? Because it scales the Scrum itself in order to achieve this descaling. So we use this simple framework, Scrum, in order to simplify the organization which it encompasses. So you basically, instead of having one team, you apply it over the 100 people. And then by applying that, you simplify the structure and processing policies and roles which are there. There are some reasons for that organization needs to be aware and also aligned to before choosing for LeSS. If they are not aligned to these goals, then better not choose LeSS. So this also gives you a clue when not to choose LeSS and when to choose. So the first one is that organizational design, the organization wants to have a design which delivers the highest business value. So that means, for example, that you're not running 200 projects at the same time, or have 200 so-called products or 50 so-called products. No organization has 50 products. I know they're calling their products, but they're not a product from a customer point of view. Even Apple has a handful of products. Even Amazon, which does really a lot, has a two hands maybe products, no more than that. So we're talking about the product from a really customer point of view. Second one is the corollary to above one, is that if you want to always, as an organization, deliver the highest business value, then your organization needs to be able to do that. So you need to, so first you need to have a focus that they really understand what is exactly this business value. And this business value obviously changes. Based on insights, based on exploration, experimentation, agility in general, what Scrum brings you in the first place. So by doing the sprints, you learn a lot and you figure out, hey, wait a minute, this is not the business value that we want. There is a better one. And so the organization needs ability to adapt. So which means that one team, one sprint works on one thing, and the next sprint might be working on something very different, which requires shifting. And so you need to have an organization which is able to shift so easily. And the third one is the not really optimizing goal, but it's a very crucial underpinning to the first two, and a very corollary to the first two is the learning organization. So it means that in order to be able to adapt, one needs to have a whole structure, and the way it works is that embraces learning. So let me give you an example. The output of a team in Scrum and LeSS is knowledge. It's not code, it's actually knowledge. And so the outcome is a certain value being created, but the output is actually the knowledge. It's not the code, it's not a product actually. And so this is really important to understand. Just to give you an example. Now we have so less background where it comes from. It's not new at all. It's actually really old. Bus and Craig have been working in different organizations for a long time, and banking and Bus mainly in telecom in Nokia. And so they build up through experiments, build up lots of knowledge. So what they did is they figured out we should write a book, and so they wrote the book, Scaling Lean and Agile Development. So they put actually a thinking part in it. So the two crucial aspects of that book is the thinking and organizational tools. So what are the thinking tools? It's a systems thinking and a lean thinking. So that book is very, very useful in order to understand the systems thinking application and lean thinking application in product development. And but it also explains a lot of organizational tools. So what happened to that book? Well, not much. People like us, coaches, trainers in Agile, loved the book, liked the book. It's very useful. But the management organizations didn't find it very practical. It was too abstract. It's really meant for people who are already knowledgeable about product development. And then what they thought, let's make it more practical. Let's write down practices, lots of practices. In fact, I was started thinking and I'm going to talk to Jim afterwards, that the practices book is kind of like similar to the pattern book, and a way how Jim explains the patterns. Maybe not entirely as the patterns, but it feels very similar to it. So they basically explain from their experience in different situations which practices should be avoided and which practices can be tried. It doesn't say these are the best practices or something like that, because the best practices generally we avoid as a best practice. Because we want to avoid tendency to stop thinking. So the practices are there for the people to learn them, not to apply them blindly. So did it work? No, really. Similar thing happened as the first book. So what happened is they published the book. People like us liked the book very much. It was very useful in the reality of introducing agility and Scrum. And so, but the management organization didn't find it very practical because they didn't really know where to start. The book contains basically like 600 practices or something. It's really thick. And but at the end, you don't really know where to start, and so you don't have some kind of a guidance in your transformation and in your change. So how to even begin? So that's why they wrote a third book, and so I cannot emphasize enough please read these books. Whether you're interested in LeSS or not, these books are extremely valuable. In fact, the irony is that the SAFE is actually referring to this first of these 3 books. So even the same SAFE framework. And yeah, and at that time it was not called LeSS, so it was not really a framework, etc. So yeah. Only lately it was actually coined as a framework. I'm not sure how long time ago, but not that long time ago. So there is also a website, less.works, which gives you a almost entire book, I think, the large scale Scrum. So you can basically very easily access anything. It's not protected in any way. And yeah. So what does the LeSS then consists of? So I'm going to go through that. I think in probably 10 minutes I can explain the whole LeSS. So this is LeSS complete picture. So they started with experiments, and then after experiments they figured out there are certain guides which help in a change, and so they explained those guides. And then you have a framework, which are basically the rules. So the same as in Scrum. And just on top of the Scrum rules, there are some additional rules, and which are applied for a setup when you have many teams. And then the core are the principles. Okay. So this is what LeSS consists of. And so what's important to understand is the framework itself and the rules are really simple. And it's basically meant to hit a balance between not having just enough rules to make sure there is a real change so that the people don't fake things, which is massively happening everywhere. And but not too much to prevent thinking. So so essentially, all those practices and all this body of knowledge, it's meant to for the people to use or not use depending on the situation. But those rules are not meant to fiddle with. Why? Because if they're really minimal, and if you start to fiddle with it, you're probably just simply avoiding the real improvement, the real change. You're trying to kind of bullshit it basically. And in this process, of making it minimal, what also happens is that we have less roles, less processes, less artifacts, all kinds of layers, coordination, waste, projects, programs, portfolio management. So one question was, I think, asked also, what do you do with the portfolios? And so what about portfolio management? Well, it's just simply not needed. Because you can very easily have a LeSS adoption. There are quite a few, which is encompassing so much of the product development, there's so much of the organization that it swallows completely the portfolio management. Everything what happens in the portfolio management is simply part of the product backlog, single product backlog. So we have a LeSS and LeSS huge. LeSS is up to 8 teams, and LeSS huge is more than 8 teams. So it goes too far to explain why 8. There are reasons for it. It has to do with the ability of the product owner to execute their job properly, so to prioritize properly. So if it becomes more than 8, then in reality, from experience, we realize that it becomes difficult for a product owner to prioritize and to understand what's actually in the backlog. That's why. So how does the LeSS work? So you have a single product owner, single backlog, and the teams are working from that single backlog. Teams do not have their own backlogs. Okay, they have a sprint backlog, but it's something else. Product backlog, there's also only one product owner for the teams, and this is up to 8 teams. And one dedicated Scrum Master for between 1 to 3 teams. So the Scrum Master must be dedicated. This is a rule. So there's no such thing as I'm part-time Scrum Master and part-time developer or something like that. And there's one sprint backlog per team. So each team has their own sprint backlog. Okay. And so how does it work? So you have a sprint planning one, just like in Scrum. And only in this one, representatives from teams come together and they discuss with each other who's exactly going to do what. And also they plan sharing, so they plan collaboration. So for example, they need to have a shared design sessions. And which brings me into the sprint planning 2, which is basically design. Just like in Scrum, no difference here. And in this case, you might have a shared sprint planning tool or a separate per team, depending on what they need to talk about. So if there is some kind of a architectural discussion that needs to happen, that might happen in a shared sprint planning tool, so multi-team sprint planning tool. Then a sprint starts, just like in Scrum. And the teams coordinate directly with each other. So Scrum Master is not a coordinator between teams. This is really important to understand. It's a huge difference with other frameworks, especially SAFe. So the teams coordinate with each other. So there is no coordinator special role or anything like that. So it's not the product owners, it's not the Scrum Masters who coordinate between teams. So they are not in between people. The one team member stands up, goes to another team member, says, we need to work together. And in the middle of the sprint, you have a product backlog refinement. So just like in Scrum, except that in LeSS, we say it has to be an event. So in a Scrum, it's not an event. It's basically undefined how you want to fill it in. And it's an activity. And so in LeSS, it's an event, and usually it takes up to 1 day. And it is actually practically always 1 day, and so it's rarely much shorter. And so because the teams are involved in understanding the customer with their product, so there is much to understand. And so each team has their own daily Scrum, and so that just like in Scrum, and the sprint finishes, then is a sprint review, just like in Scrum. And just in this forum, you have all the teams together in a kind of a bazaar forum where the inner corners work separately, work in groups, and where the customer and users can walk around, the stakeholders, and have discussions with each team separately about what has been delivered, and give feedback. That feedback is being gathered, and the product owner might reflect upon it. So there is a diverge, converge process there. And but the duration is similar or same to it's same as in Scrum. And then you have a retrospective, nothing special about it, just like in Scrum. This is from Scrum. The only thing, and this is really important to understand, the only thing which is really different from Scrum is the overall retrospective. So the overall retrospective is in addition to Scrum, which doesn't exist in Scrum. It might be happening in some form in a normal retrospective, but it's not really intended like that. And in overall retrospective is a meeting where the representatives from teams, together with the managers who are involved, and a product owner and Scrum Masters, come together to talk about the system, to talk about how the product development system works, and to improve that. Okay, so in a normal retrospective per team, the team talks about the stuff that the team is concerned with. In the overall retrospective, we are talking about the system, all the teams all together, and in maybe also involving other aspects. For example, they might even talk about the HR practices there, and which are immediately concerning of multiple teams, not only one team. And or improving, I don't know, the testing for the end product that is being delivered, which is concerning for everybody, or whatever. And then the next sprint starts.
So
okay,
Viktor, I think we can take a pause over here because there are a lot of questions.
Okay.
So I'll just put some perspective over here. One is, I think this is a kind of departure from thinking of each team maybe having a product owner versus a product, and at the same time the product backlog as well.
Yeah.
So couple of questions around that. One is when people are thinking like whether a single product owner will be able to help in defining the product backlog and managing that, or helping resolving the dependencies people may be having. So that is one question. And second question, there may be more questions on that as well, but another question which was popping up in my mind was when in case you talk about SAFe, then people think in terms of the system team, which is in different frameworks there is different handled in different ways. There's system integration. So how does it get handled in LeSS? So first two questions, and we'll take more.
Okay, the second one I will probably need more explanation, but the first one I get. We need to first talk about what exactly the job of product owner actually is. And in Scrum, both in Scrum and LeSS, the job of a product owner is to establish the vision for the product and to put the product backlog in order, so to prioritize, and to order the items in the backlog, as Gene would say, and then to engage with the stakeholders and customers to see how this vision can be established and to convey this vision continuously. This is basically the key jobs of a product owner. And what is too often misunderstood and is that product owner must be the one which is writing items in a backlog and dealing with that, and also figuring out every single item and what should be there, and the acceptance criteria, whatever it is evolving in that. That's not in Scrum case, and that's actually not in LeSS either. So it's obviously okay for a product owner to do that, but it's not the primary job of the product owner to do that, because refinement is a collaboration between teams, team members, product owner, and user stakeholders, etc. So in LeSS, this becomes much more clear, because it's practically impossible to have a product owner behave as a business analyst. Let's put it that way. So, so to be in between person, simply because there are not enough of these people to behave like that. So product owner is nothing like a business analyst, absolutely nothing. And what I see all the time is that we are misunderstanding the product owner with the business analyst. So too many people who previously been business analysts, they become a product owner. So if you have a team which is actually taking care of fully of what we typically call business analysis, in other words, understanding the customer users, engaging directly with them, and interacting directly, intensively. In other words, clarifying what is being selected, then you absolutely don't need many product owners. So there is one product owner can easily take care of up to 8 teams. Okay, no issue there whatsoever. And especially if your product backlog is an actual product backlog and not a previously arranged spec list which has hundreds of items, and a product owner cannot get through it, and they keep themselves busy with such a huge list. Product backlog is typically fairly short, and for one team has maybe 15 items. And that's actually for the whole backlog, for the whole product for the coming years. And so it has to be progressively refined, etc. So there's a lots of elements there. If you do Scrum properly, you don't need many product owners. And yeah.
Just to summarize, or I mean, as far as in order to help the product owner in, there may be some support from a team which may be in terms of a business analyst. Do you see that, or it is like the team is interacting with the product owner to resolve the problem directly?
So the team is for the teams are for the most of the work which entails of figuring out what needs to be done, and is actually the team's responsibility. It's not the product owner's responsibility. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that way, I mean, if you see that the work of the product owner becomes much lesser, and he can really focus on what he's supposed to be doing anyways.
Yes, correct. So the reality, what I see really massively everywhere, is a product owner is actually not really empowered to make a real decisions which impact the end customer, and is not really responsible for return on investment, which is actually job of a product owner. But they are more kind of like a team work manager, basically. And that's very unfortunate. The product owner position, it was never intended like that. It's not what the Scrum is all about, and definitely not, unless it's not possible to do that.
Sure. So actually, the second question, what I was talking about is that, let's say that we have, and at least I'm talking in terms of how SAFe really works. So let's say that multiple teams are working, and each takes their sprint backlog based on whatever is being prioritized by the product owner, and then they create features. They may be, those features may need to be integrated together as a system. Fine. So, for example, multiple teams are working together, so the increment of each team needs to be integrated together, and for that purpose, SAFe has a concept of system team, which basically makes sure that at the end of each iteration, you have something which is integrated, and you can really do a system demo. So in terms of this integration of whatever the outcome or the increment different teams are producing or
Yeah.
creating, how LeSS deals with it.
Yeah, so I'll do a bit a longer answer to that. And the first one we need to realize is the concept of feature teams and how the collaboration works. So in LeSS, we say the more people depend on each other, the better it is. In LeSS, we love dependencies. Let me repeat, in LeSS, we love dependencies. The more people depend on each other, the better it is. So dependencies are never have been a problem in product development. Dependencies are good. You don't want independent teams, because independent teams, they all go their own direction. They all do stuff. What we want at the end is a single product which actually works, and not a parts of the product done by different teams. So the dependencies are good. What the problem is the cost of dependencies. So the dependency between by having a certain structure which increases dependencies. So there is a people talking to other people in different groups, in a system team, in a component teams, and this increases the cost of dependencies a lot. So what we have a feature team, a team which is able to deliver end-to-end. This also means integration. Okay, so this means that team is doing everything, is able to do everything in order to deliver from a customer point of view end-to-end. This includes integration. Okay, so if the teams need to work together to actually, if 3 teams are delivering 3 things end-to-end, then obviously they might be working on a same component together, and so that component needs to be delivered first or whatever. They're gonna talk to each other. They're gonna work daily with each other, and there's no systems team, nothing like that, and no architects. They simply those teams have a coordination techniques to work with each other directly, synchronously, to deliver the product. And obviously, there's a whole range of technical excellence practices to ensure this is possible in a more continuous manner. So no time to explain that, but it's underpinning of this, obviously. If you don't have those technical excellence practices, forget about everything. So because you have to be able to, when you have to do continuous integration, for example, you have to avoid branching. You have to work, in other words, from trunk-based development, etc., etc.
Sure, I think that makes a fair amount of sense. So I think with these 2 questions, you can continue, and we will be taking more questions after you're done. Right?
Okay. Good. They gave me also a chance to actually explain some of the follow-up slides, so that I can skip those. But considering it's the 1 hour is almost gone, so I'm just gonna do one thing which I just started to touch, which is the team-based organization. And let me check. Yeah. And so team-based organization. So the teams in LeSS are dedicated, cross-functional, collocated, long-lived. Okay, and so when we say a team, especially when we say feature team, and it means the team which is able to do end-to-end. So that involves all aspects necessary to deliver end-to-end. So for fun, I added actually this white piece here. This is from SafeSite, which basically explicitly states that it's not the responsibility of a team. It's the responsibility of a business team or something like that. It's definitely not of a Scrum team or a team in what's called Scrum team in SAFe. So, but in LeSS, this is actually the responsibility of the team, same team. So contracts and suppliers, end user training, legal guidance, marketing, security and compliance expertise, fitness for use, solution knowledge. This is the responsibility of a team. Because if these are the things which are needed to deliver a product to the customer, then a team should have the knowledge to do it. Okay, so this is really important to understand as a difference. If you have feature teams, what is a feature team basically? A feature team is a team which can go over multiple components, multiple applications, what's in the banking called, and in order to deliver something to the customer. So you should not have a team which is only dealing with the front office, I don't know, Excel applications or something like that. And then you have a separate team which is dealing some kind of a Java mid office. And then you have a separate team which is dealing with the back office and accounting, et cetera, et cetera. Now, a team should be able to transcend this, okay? So when you are able to transcend this, to go over the multiple components, then means that also these teams must be able to see the product. So there's a whole product focus, okay? So otherwise they cannot go over the multiple components. What is also very interesting is that if you have the feature teams, if you're able to do that, then you also simplify lots of things which are commonly necessary if you have a component teams. Since they are whole product focus, the teams are also better able to deal with the architecture. Okay, so they're better able to deal with the system design, etc. They're also better able to deal with analysis, which is cross-component analysis, for example, from a really business point of view. And they're also better to deal with the, let's say, integration testing, and because they themselves actually need to combine multiple components together. If you have component teams, then it's obviously you need all these separate roles and structures and this complication. So you need this outside of the team analyst, outside of the team system engineer or architect, etc. You need a system team, whatever you want to call it. And you need outside of the normal team integration testers. Why? Because which component is going to take care of integration tests? None of them. They are concerned with the component. Nobody of them is actually concerned with the actual integration of all components altogether. They don't have the insight, they don't have the concern, they don't have the whole scope of control for them is a component, not the whole application, not the whole end-to-end product. Next one is when we, and this is really from a business point of view, really important, from a customer point of view, is let's say you have a product backlog, which is proper product backlog, which means that it's actually from the customer has items where the item 1 is the most important and the second item is second most important, etc., etc. Okay, so this is the order of stuff that should be delivered. And if you have component teams, what happens is that item number 1 is going to be delivered, can be delivered by changing component A and component B. So a component A team is going to work on their work, and a component B team is going to work on their work. Good. So far, so good. But you have a component C, an item which needs to be where component C is involved is actually much further in the backlog. So then this begs the question: what is component C team going to do in the meantime? Well, what usually happens is actually the worst possible what you can happen, that you have a product owner on top of the component C team, so-called product owner, fake product owner, which makes up work. Let me repeat. There is a person in organization which is paid salary to make up work, to just fantasize work, okay? It's not important work, that's clearly here, because the product backlog is important work. So they make up work because they're not supposed to work on a less important stuff. That's what most commonly happens. So they have their own backlogs and they need to fill the backlog basically. That literally happens. There's a massive amount of product owners, so-called product owners, which are literally need to make sure that the team has work. They also say that I need to make sure that my team has work. Just think for a second from a CEO point of view. You have a whole bunch of teams, and you want to achieve something, and that's clearly yeah, there are certain most important things to be achieved. And there is lots of people running around making up what should be actually done. And so you could say they shouldn't be doing that. Well, they don't have a choice because their component team needs to do something. And that's the only thing they can do, or they can go home. So in the feature teams, you have the same backlog, but each team is actually not looking at the component, they're looking at what's most important in the backlog. So this means that those three teams need to take the first items in the backlog. Okay, this is clearly the demonstration of a principle of doing the highest business value first. If you have component teams, you're basically breaking this principle. Okay, so feature teams doesn't mean that they can do everything. Okay, they are. What it means is that they are not specialized in technology. They're less specialized in technology, more specialized in from a customer point of view. So the specialization changes. That's what basically happens. Okay, so this is an example of that. You have a team which is organized by Android and iOS, and when you shift to the feature teams, you end up with a team which is knows most about the payments, and another team which knows most about administration of the payments. And the product is, in this case, mobile payments. You have a single backlog. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna leave this slide because this is the core of the team, and I'm gonna shift to the questions. Is that okay? I guess it's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so my list is already ordered. Let's see, the number one, unfortunately, how is it different from other scaling frameworks, SAFe, Scrum at Scale, etc.? So my goal was, by explaining what I just explained, to give you some insight which enables you to answer this question at least partially yourself. I'm going to explain it, give answer. I really don't want to waste my time with this question. So I'm going to explain from one perspective the differences. So it's actually uncomparable with each other. So LeSS is not really comparable to SAFe nor Scrum at Scale. So it's so different that you can't even compare it. And so it's unfortunately, yeah. So when you get very deep into product development, especially complex product development with a number of many teams, then you start to realize these are fundamentally different ways of looking at the product development. So a label on all kinds of product development practices of how to work effectively with a whole set of teams. And so the framework itself is extremely simple. And so I just explained, and most of what I just explained in the past half an hour is actually more in-depth explanation of why than actual rules. Rules are explained in 5 minutes or something. And yeah, SAFe, so on a Scrum at Scale, it's actually built up by Jeff Sutherland, and it's somehow for me complete departure from Scrum, basically. And I think it has to do with the vision of what Scrum stands for and what you can use it for. In LeSS, we see Scrum as a framework which can help in a product development. And so the product development, my profession is product development. So my profession is not a LeSS trainer or a Scrum trainer or whatever, or a scaling expert or whatever. I'm a product developer, and so software-based product developer. And so so Scrum is a way to improve that. And Scrum at Scale seems to be about how to apply Scrum on anything. So that's for me very difficult to comprehend because I'm not expert in everything. And yeah. So I guess I haven't answered it properly. I really hope that you get in depth of understanding how less thinking is, so the thinking part, and you're able to answer yourself. Next one. What do you think less is not so, why do you think less is not so famous compared to other scaling frameworks? Because it's very hard. You actually need to change and simplify organization. So SAFe doesn't demand that. You can do SAFe without changing that much. That's the shortest answer. It basically SAFe sells what the customers ask. Less not. Less gives you what you need. That's the shortest answer. And that obviously sells much harder. So the typical remark from people outside of LeSS community is that, oh, LeSS, that's actually when you want to do it for real. And we want to kind of make a step, and hopefully we end up somewhere good. So this is why they choose SAFe. It's safer. Looking for a case study experience with LeSS has been successful. Until now, not clear how it differentiates itself from Scrum and SAFe. It doesn't differentiate from a Scrum. Okay, so the question is looking for a case study experience where LeSS has been successful. There's a whole bunch of it. So there's a lots of case studies, and they can be found on a LeSS site. And maybe I should let me see how to. Stop share. So I'm going to open up LeSS site just to demonstrate that, and share screen. Wait, how do I open this? I guess I'm going to need to do it like this.
There should be a button for the share screen below.
Yeah, I just need to choose the right screen, but
okay.
It's in Firefox. Okay, I'm gonna do it like this. Desktop 2. Okay. Desktop 1. Okay. Share. Okay, you see my whole desktop. Sorry about that. And I'm gonna make this one huge. So this site, and you have a case studies here. I don't know if it's easy to read because it might be small. So there's a whole bunch of it, and one of them, the one from me, is Port of Rotterdam, and which talks about how to do it with 5 teams, and a whole story about it. And it's very, very large, and it's the proper name would be experience report. It's not really a case study; it's experience report. But it's educational. You can see how it really goes step by step, all kinds of details, etc. One thing for sure you're not going to get is these silly claims about a 30% improvement of something. Really, that's just marketing bullshit, sorry to say. And so you get the insight into how it actually works, how it's being done, and how it sometimes failed. Some of these case studies actually are failures, okay? So they explained also failure. They are very, very useful. And also my case study explains some things which didn't go well, and which we'll learn from it. Okay.
Actually, one of the prospective people may be having this question is that sometimes in the service companies, it happens that, okay, client says, we are going to use LeSS. Fine, okay, that's good. But then what are the changes basically from a team perspective, or in case they want to embrace it, what all they should do actually? I think that should be a right question.
So those case studies give almost each of them insight in how it's being done, and in the detail. I can give you a general pattern on how it's normally being done.
Sure.
Maybe misusing the word pattern, Jim is going to kill me. What happens is that first they get educated, and so the first level of education is that it's management which gets educated. So they become almost an expert in how their own product development actually works. Remarkably enough, many managers don't really know how their product development really works.
Yep.
And then then the choice is made to give education to one of the groups, which is potentially gonna adopt less. And so why education first? Is because the people involved there need to be able to decide whether they want less or not. So it's a completely voluntary. So it's not that the management can say to the people, you're gonna get less and that's what we decided. It doesn't happen like that. And it's really a rule, by the way, it has to be voluntary. And then what happens, the product is defined, and then the product owner is appointed, and all the work has to go through the product owner. And also the the teams are formed. So properly structured teams are formed, which is that the majority of the teams are feature teams. So only exceptions are component teams. There are some exceptional situations where you have a component team. Is that the answer or question? Or?
Yeah, I think that gives a kind of direction how to move.
Yeah. Okay. So it's essentially no difference. When you talk about the essence of Scrum, there is no difference between Scrum and LeSS. When you talk about the details of Scrum, then there are differences, but I don't consider them that much relevant. There is a huge difference with SAFe. It actually solves a completely different problem. Be aware of that. LeSS is meant to help change your improve your organizational structure, which is going to enable to deliver a product. SAFe is about, I believe, I'm not an expert in SAFe, is about I forgot the portfolio management. So it's about no, I forgot. Sorry. It's really about how to do the management of the whole product portfolio. Okay, so as we have a PI planning in SAFe, how we have planning in LeSS, and what is the frequency? So I'm gonna first focus on the word planning here. We plan all the time, especially during the daily Scrum in LeSS, okay? Because that's basically from Scrum, it's not even LeSS. So planning happens in daily Scrum, for example, but not only daily Scrum, it could also change in other moments. But it must happen at least in daily Scrum, okay, that you replan. That's where the planning happens. Might be surprising. You should look at a talk from Jim about it, and so to understand what the heck I mean by that. And then you have obviously sprint planning 1 and sprint planning 2. Sprint planning 1 is planning where the multiple teams are coming together. It's about planning the sprint. And then you have now I'm getting kind of to the bigger scale. You have a product backlog refinement, which is generally multi-team product backlog refinement. So in one area or up to 8 teams, all teams come together every sprint and spend the full day to refine, okay? So to look at the backlog and do refinement of the backlog. And that's where also part of the planning happens, but a more, let's put it, they look more further down, okay? They look also what, and they engage very much with the customer regarding that. And not only that, which is not really part of the, and then you have an overall product backlog refinement, which is an optional meeting where representatives from the different teams come together to look at what needs to be refined and big chunks of work which get more or less priority, etc. And it's all done by the teams. And then you have now I'm going kind of backwards, by the way. And then you have at the beginning, typically, actually always in the beginning when you introduce LeSS, you have an initial product backlog refinement. This happens only once. And where all teams come together in a customized workshop, and they have a deep and full understanding of the whole product and the vision of it and how we're going to engage. And they discuss maybe some also fundamental architectural points about it, and they decide upon it, etc. So essentially, even in sprint review, planning happens. So in sprint review, they figure out that something hasn't gone as expected, and then they adjust accordingly. So that might be also change in the planning. So this happens all the time. Much more than in SAFe, in fact. I'm always surprised by popularity of PI planning because it's basically a waterfall approach.
Yeah, so I think, just to put things in perspective,
Yeah.
so people understand the sprint planning happens. They are looking for, uh, I also understand that there is a continuous backlog refinement, which is happening on multiple teams level, isn't it? In less.
Yeah.
So now continuous backlog refinement is happening. Do they have, because in SAFe, they have a kind of PI planning in which they define what could be the roadmap for them for example, for next 5 or 6 sprints. So
Yeah.
is there something like that over here, or it is like you can change the way multiple teams are going to work together every sprint?
Yeah, it's called a product backlog refinement in Scrum. In
Yeah.
product backlog refinement, you look ahead number of sprints, and every sprint you adjust. So,
So I
and in LeSS, it's basically multi-team product backlog refinement, where then it becomes really clear. So the product can be very large. There's no limit to the size, by the way, and where all the work is in the walls, and people walk around and they see the work and they collaborate in. And don't have time to explain in details how it's being facilitated, and they replan. And so they see new items coming up. They see how these new items affect existing items, and they need to figure out what those items are. They need to split those items up. They need to estimate those items. They need to then a product owner and with the suggestions of the teams, they need to prioritize, and they need to figure out who's going to do what. They figure out certain dependencies between teams, so they might shift work between each other so that the cost of dependency becomes lower, etc., etc. It's a very interactive, very active, very intensive meeting every single sprint.
Yeah, so I just to summarize, because I see like how SAFe does it and how you just mentioned how LeSS does it. So I just want to make sure like how it is differentiate.
Yeah.
So in SAFe, first of all, they still continue to have the component teams, and there are a lot of dependencies. There is no end-to-end focus when it as far as their sprints is concerned. So
Yep.
so that each team may be having its own product backlog and product owner. For example, here what the product backlog is basically on the functional oriented or the business oriented, which it means that that particular team should be able to do it end to end using feature team concept by reducing the dependencies. So that way, they can pick up the backlogs, backlog items in the sprint on the regular basis, because they themselves have to handle all the dependencies, all the integration issues, and don't need to think about anything else. So that way, they can continue working on sprint by sprint basis instead of thinking about a plan for 6 sprints together.
Okay. Yeah, the key aspect here to understand is the feature teams. So this is really a must in a LeSS and not in SAFe. And yeah, this is extremely important. And so because you really don't want to waste time by spending a whole PI planning to figure out how to deliver a single thing. It's basically one team which takes care of it, and you don't need a whole planning meeting for it. They look at the 5 components, and they change the 5 components, and they deliver them. You don't go to other teams for that.
I think the key difference is that the concept of the feature team can be applied in SAFe as well, but
yes,
the point is that here we are doing the continuous backlog refinement. And we are not meeting once in a after six sprints. We are meeting every sprint, refining continuously,
yes,
and making it ready for the next sprint. So that way, we don't really have just one single big bang planning.
Yeah, one thing to be very much aware of, the fact that you can do something in a framework or whatever doesn't mean it's actually happening. And of course, in any kind of a methodology, you can deliver every day if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's not the point. The point is how to ensure that you move to that situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. How is it different than the Nexus framework? Actually, that one is interesting. There is not that much difference with Nexus framework. There is this integration thing in Nexus. Such thing doesn't exist in LeSS, simply because it's being done by the teams. So, but I understood that it depends very much how that is being explained. So it sounded as not a good idea to have an integration team, because that's something that it should be done by the teams. But it's not really about integration, as I understood. So it's the term is a bit unclear, etc. But this is a minor point. If you look at the general message of Nexus and the whole idea behind the thinking behind, it's quite in line with LeSS. There is not that much difference. So what is maybe difference is in a practical sense. LeSS has a huge body of knowledge with a huge number of large experience, lots of practices, 3 books. It's really developed, and and I'm not sure that's also the case for Nexus.
So I think this the change also is around the focus on the descaling and structural changes.
Yeah.
Which makes the basic foundation, because that may not be the case there.
Yeah. What are prerequisites before we decide to go for LeSS? There are quite a few. I mentioned just few that, I need to switch. There are quite a few actually. And
your video is off.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch to a different one. And I mentioned a few, which means that the people need to be educated before they actually decide to do it. And that's the first one. That's a more kind of like when you in the first step of adoption. But much more important is those 3 optimizing goals that I mentioned before. They need to be aligned with the organizational wish, let's put it that way. So organization has to want to have these goals. And so it might be already having it explicitly, which doesn't happen often. Usually the management never really think about their own optimizing goals. When I ask them, what are your optimizing goals? Almost everybody says we want to make more money. Okay, so that's not the question. The optimizing goal is about the organizational setup that you have in order to make money. So what do you optimize your organizational setup for? And so that's why the optimizing goals are so damn important. So this is a prerequisite. But so if there some organizations don't want to optimize these things.
But does it translate into firing people?
Sorry, is it?
Does it translate into firing people?
Firing people, that's a very good question. No. So it can be understood like that. And there were situations where the management said, oh, this sounds very good. I can let go of quite a bunch of those roles. First of all, project managers. So this did happen a few times, unfortunately. And that's absolutely not the message, and that's and there's by far the most cases that's not what happens. What happens is that you are changing the system, which is especially the learning organization part, where people are also given opportunity to learn something else, but they will need to learn. So if they refuse to learn, it's their option basically. So. So you set the stage basically, and you give opportunity for the people to participate in the stage. Let's put it that way. And then you provide all means for them to be able to participate in the stage, regardless of their slowness, ability, or whatever. Because we assume that people are very much able to learn, so we want to tap into this ability. And that's what LeSS is for. And so firing is, there's also a very practical reason why firing is a really bad idea. is because is my wife giving me something to drink? Yeah. So it's it's simply that if you start firing people, it creates such a fear in organization that it becomes impossible to introduce less.
Absolutely.
So whether it's ongoing or not ongoing doesn't matter. It just destroys the whole adoption, basically. Imagine preaching self-management, taking care of the whole product, and teaching that to everybody. And then, oh yeah, by the way, some of you are going to be fired. That doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, a good question, by the way. Can you please suggest some books to gain more understanding around LeSS? I think I mentioned them. Let me go in depth. These 3 books. You start first with the last one. Okay, so the large scale Scrum, because it's easier to digest it. It's also practical. It gives you a bit of a head start to know that you can do something. And then go to the first one and then the second one. Okay, so so I explained already what those books actually are and what they contain. So you can actually find everything there. What I do think, and now I'm biased regarding that, is that you can it's very difficult to get the thinking part out of the books. So you can theoretically, it's explained, like it's the first 2 chapters in thinking tools you can see here, but it's simply not very likely. So I would strongly suggest to go to a certified LeSS practitioner for that, and definitely not because of certification, but this is the place where you learn the thinking part. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And organizational tools part also is quite important. Assume Scrum implementation has happened across organization. Is it enough for organization to look at LeSS implementation to optimize as whole? I'm not sure I understand this one. Assume Scrum implementation has happened across organization. Okay. You mean you have lots of teams, they're all doing Scrum. Okay. Is it enough for organization to look at LeSS implementation to optimize? I assume
they have started with Scrum, and
yeah.
so this is the foundation they have built, and now they are thinking beyond. Actually, I mean, sometimes they start with the pilot teams and some ways, and then they start thinking how they can build further on that, on top of that.
Yeah, what I almost always come across is that there was never Scrum in the first place. They just think they had Scrum. And so you basically need to push a reset button, and that usually happens in the training. And they start to, the remark which I get massively at the end of the training is they say, oh, bloody hell, we realized that we never really did Scrum. It was kind of a Scrumish, and you have everywhere daily Scrums and use Jira and this kind of stuff. Don't use Jira, please. Stop using Jira, everybody. It's awful tool. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. Is it possible to implement LeSS outside of IT? Well, it's not really. So IT, I assume that you mean related to the software versus hardware product development, not IT in the departments, because it's most cases of LeSS not really IT. It's in the product development. So the companies like BMW, I was involved for autonomous driving. They have a product development. It's not IT, and they build autonomous driving, and they use LeSS to organize the teams to do that. And they have almost 100 teams to do that. And so, is it possible? Is it maybe? We haven't tried. It's not really meant for that. If you would ask anybody in the LeSS community, hey, can you help me implement outside of LeSS IT? We might say sure, just for fun, to figure out what the heck are we even talking about. And so yeah, I don't know. That's the answer. Yeah. As we have, Yeah, what I can assume Scrum. In less framework, not less huge, we have one product backlog and one product owner. How can one PO manage up to 8 teams? How can one PO being available to all teams? So I think I answered the question, but I'm not sure if.
I think I'm just wondering. I mean, that may be a little bit from the logistics standpoint as well.
Yeah.
Making product owner available to the teams because sometimes, at least from the Indian perspective, lots of teams are working in this distributed fashion. So there are time zones involved and all that stuff actually.
Yeah.
So in that case, the airtime available from the product owner may be a challenge for the multiple teams.
Yeah. So let me take an extreme example. Product owner sits in his garden and looks around, and he's building. This is an actual product, by the way. It's building it's a system which controls all movement in harbor of Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and so it's a product basically, and so everything that happens in the harbor is being it's under authority of the Port of Rotterdam, and they have it's a product which ensures that this is actually well controlled and managed. So he sits in the garden and think, wait a minute, wouldn't it be interesting if the captain of a ship, when he starts leaving Shanghai, could get information about how fast should he travel? No, let me put it in even different way. Could it be possible that we make sure that there is a reduction of using of fuel for the ships? Okay, so that's what the product owner thinks in the garden, and then the product owner goes to teams in the overall product backlog refinement, drops this idea, and then leaves, and it says teams figure out. And so does the product owner even need to be involved in figuring this out? Theoretically, not after that. So so this assistance to teams, yes, it's true, but it's unless it's probably much more limited than the people assume it should be. And so it's normally is. So they are used to Scrum, where the product owner is basically doing really a lot for the team, and which is simply not the case in LeSS. So even these very complex, hard, abstract questions can be taken care of by the teams. Now, this begs the question, how? Because there are so many teams, how are they going to organize that? We have practices for that. And so one of the practices is called leading team. So one of the teams takes such a big question and they start to digest it. And then they share with other teams, etc., etc.
Actually, the problem in the distributed perspective is that people don't understand the context. Fine. So they absolutely may not be having clue like what exactly you're talking about, and then that's where you want to understand what you are talking about.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, definitely as far as solutioning is concerned, then definitely the team can figure that out. But sometimes understanding the problem context and also like because product owner may be coming out with information or talking to different stakeholders and coming out with some information.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So what I meant with my answer is actually exactly that. So it's when I meant to figure this out, I meant actually first go talk to people and get in touch, understand the context. And this is exactly what should happen. Now, now begs the question, the team is in India and the customer is in Netherlands. And then, yeah, and where else? Yeah. And so I had quite a few of these situations exactly like this. And what the actual problem is not how to actually be present as a product owner, but how to get the team to be respected by the actual customer on the other side. And so they, so the people in India can pick up a phone and say, I want to talk to a manager on business side because I want to know how the heck they are doing trading, okay, on a trading floor. Mm-hmm. And so that should be possible. It should be perfectly fine. Unfortunately, in reality, that proves to be such a barrier
Yeah.
to happen. And so we should be talking about how to make that possible, and not, yeah. By the way, it's already possible. It's more that that in many situations, because of the previous way of working, and because of the contra games, etc., you have this situation. But essentially, the distance is a barrier, obviously, but it's a solvable one when it when you talk about understanding the context.
Sure. Actually, I was just reading a comment. So it's from Nico. So he's when he talks about less outside IT, he was really talking about I mean around beyond IT department, HR policies, marketing, etc., etc.
Yeah. So yeah. So to be honest, when departments like that come to me and they say we want to do Scrum, and I get the two types of situations. One, they shouldn't be such a team in the first place, because they are just one tiny part in a chain. They should be actually part of an actual team. They should be spread around and be more part of the cross-functional teams. That's very common. So it's interesting that they won't be Scrum. They shouldn't be the team in the first place. So the second one is that you have like HR, let's say, and HR is very, very involved in LeSS, but a completely different purpose than to be learning Scrum. I mean, they shouldn't be using Scrum. That's a bit silly. And so to be honest, it's kind of like a saying with some people, they use Scrum to teach kids to behave in house, you know, and so they have a task board for the kids to track their task, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, nice, but it's not my profession. So I'm not sure. Yeah, it's I don't know what the thinking behind this, because the purpose is not to do Scrum. The purpose is to improve your work. So
Or even implement less. Actually, that is not the purpose.
yeah. So it's overemphasizing the framework. Let's put it that way. If you are trying to implement it everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So how do you define a feature team? Did I skip any questions, because they're shifting sometimes?
Actually, they are shifting based on the voting.
Yeah, I noticed that. So, but I think I answered above all of them. So how do you define a feature team? Let me go back to the actual slide of a definition of a feature team and just basically explain it briefly. So a feature team is a cross-functional, cross-component, stable, and long-lived. Long-lived means until they die. Okay, so sometimes people talk about, have a discussion, debate whether long-lived is a 1 year or something like that, and after that you need to disturb the team or something like that. No, until they die. Okay, so and they take a customer-centric feature in the form of product backlog items, and they deliver customer-centric features, and they deliver a potentially shippable product increment. Okay. And so they make sure there is an actual potentially shippable product increment. And so this is regardless of how large the product is, how many components there are, etc. So, and such team has the necessary knowledge and skills to complete an end-to-end customer-centric feature. If not, the team is expected to learn or acquire the needed knowledge and skill. Okay, so, and I know from reality, this is a very painful challenge for the people, and because many people have are preconditioned that in DNA the only thing they can do is run manual tests, or the only thing they can do is support or whatever, and or do only database configuration or something like that. So breaking this barrier for the people and having them realize it's actually perfectly safe to learn, and it's quite hard, it's quite challenging. This is why introducing LeSS is not easy at all. So this is the core essence of a feature team. This slide basically explains it.
I'll just give one example actually. So, I mean, I was working in a bank, so they were having a a business initiative which required to collaborate the internet banking, core banking, and the loan system together. So instead of having three different teams working on their own work, actually on the internet banking work, and then integrating it later, actually, so they
Yeah.
what they decided was that have the developers of all these systems or applications together, and so that they can work end to end. So this is where the whole idea of the cross component comes into picture. And as Victor suggested that the work keeps on coming to this team, so you don't dismantle this team just because the business initiative is over. Some other work will be coming from somewhere else, so they have a kind of competency and for the business initiatives, and work keeps on coming to them. So that's how they keep on surviving.
Yes, it's pretty good explained. Having said that, I can imagine that some people listening now thinking like, what the heck? Do you know how many systems do we have and end to end? You know how long it is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why we have a feature team adoption map. It's a journey, okay? So the first step of the journey might not be that you can deal completely end to end, but you have a certain scope that you can deal with, but at least it's a much more cross-component than it was before, okay? And then you have also a definition of done. So some teams, in some cases, might be possible to immediately have the teams to do integration testing. But in some teams, that's really difficult because there is so much involved, like in the banking systems, in order to do integration end to end from the front office all the way to the accounting. It's really hard. So it takes a long time, etc. So having one team taking care of that every sprint, it's going to take years before they reach that level. So it's a journey, and where you continuously improve definition of done, and you continuously improve the ability to take a bigger scope. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. It's amazing. We still have about 100 people. Okay.
It's 77 now.
Yeah. What are the anti-patterns in LeSS? There's not entirely sure. So there is in a practices book that I mentioned. It's full of the things to avoid.
Yeah.
So it says avoid. I don't know. Avoid individual performance reviews. I think that's one of them. And if not, it should be. Avoid Jira. That one is not in a book. It should be in a book. It's an anti-pattern. Yeah. Yeah, regarding Jira, it's more practical advice. Can you use Jira to manage product backlog? Yes. Is it a good way to do that? No. There are way better ways. For example, Google Sheet is way better. And should you use Jira to manage sprint backlog? Oh, please don't. So that makes no sense whatsoever. Whoever uses Jira to manage sprint backlog doesn't understand sprint backlog. It's really clear as that. So I always find funny in the trainings to ask people, why do they use Jira? And usually the answers give me insight in misunderstandings of Scrum. So.
Okay, I think, I'll just take one step here is that, at least from Indian perspective, we work in a distributed scenarios. Most of the clients are somewhere else. So there has to be some mechanism to collaborate and work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, at least from our perspective, that has been one of the reasons. Only thing is that I think, and because, in the situation we are living in right now, where everyone is remote, that
Yep.
becomes another challenge, and that's where these tools are all about. Definitely, when it comes to working in this fashion, so what we generally try is that we have a physical board, and then definitely we'll have some electronic tools to collaborate with the distributed partners. This is how it really works. But having said that, do you see any specific tools which you which is far better than Jira, considering these challenges we face, or it is all about spreadsheets?
So yeah, we need to distinguish which part of the work are we talking about. So the product backlog definitely should be digital, and especially if you no, not definitely. It's obviously digital when you are talking about the distance, so the people are not sitting together. I have seen physical product backlog, which is not even managed actually digitally. There is a digital document, but the actual management of the backlog happened physically. It's really interesting. So there's a big board, there's just big cards, and they are written and they are being shifted constantly for 5 teams, and they're working together like that. So I've seen it. It works really nice. So, but for product backlog is digital, and then Google Sheets, obviously, and it doesn't matter how far you're distant, it works just fine. And and then when you talk about the sprint backlog, if you have a team in India, I assume it's an actual properly set up cross-functional team according to Scrum, then or less, whatever, then they are collocated and they sit together. And so this means they share work between each other, so they can do a physical one. They don't need a digital one. Even if everybody else is in other place, they don't need to have a digital one. Why? Because sprint backlog is none of the concern anybody outside of the team. Only team is concerned about the task board. So I quite often get to teams which become very uncomfortable with that statement, and they start to complain. So what's the reasoning? Well, the best one that I heard, and this one I heard in Bangalore, is how else can I show to my manager at the end of the year that I work really hard? And that's just awful. And so it's a dysfunction, huge one. And so, yeah. And then you have a situation, the last one, which you talk about remote work. Okay, so there are people now in this virus spread all over the place, working from home, etc. This is an exceptional situation, and and we need to also treat it like that, and also discuss it like that. Exceptional in the sense that you need to basically throw everything out and then look at what's really going on and adapt accordingly. Is it good or not good? We have no idea. Okay, so hopefully it's not going to take too long, and if it takes much longer, then we need to figure out what are really the best ways of working together then. And yeah. So, but the best tool for remote work is actually this one, Zoom. So whenever I see people remotely, whether it's the proper amount of money to have a proper communication, video conferencing tools.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
My question was, can Kanban and LeSS work together?
Yeah, I'll try to answer, but I feel always uncomfortable with these comparisons between frameworks. There is seriously not much to learn from it, and it's really no matter what I answer, you will not learn actually much. And so, but I'll try to answer nevertheless because you asked. So there are situations where there are less adoptions, where the Kanban Kanban kind of like practices have been used. And so, for example, they don't have a sprint backlog, but they are more a flow. And so, but the rest of the of the less practices, etc., they're perfectly in place. They just simply dropped many of the typical Scrum practices, which are on a team level, and they use more Kanban-ish practices instead. So that happens, and that is it something bad or good? No, actually, there are certain type of work which actually makes perfect sense to have more a flow with a VIP limit, etc. And then to have a sprint planning and to run actually what you planned in the beginning. So such as, for example, I had one group where they need to order servers, okay? And so you can say you should actually deliver a whole server within a sprint. So it's a physical server with the software on it, etc. stuff. So, but it takes 3 months. And so there's lots of orders and you need to manage that work. And the teams need to do that. So they use common practices to do that. Yeah, that's it.
Yep, I get that.
I think one scenario which generally happens in many such large organization is where it is all about production, support kind of scenarios instead of the planned ones. So does it also happen in this scenario as well?
Yeah, that one is a bit, it depends very, so let me give you a story. There was a support unit and support group, so which picks up the phone and says, hey, system is down, you need to do something about it. So typically in less adoptions, what I do is suggest to always incorporate those people in the feature teams. And then they start to indeed say, we need something like Kanban to manage our work. And what we usually do, I basically always do, is look at the actual work. Because usually what happens is 99% of that work is actually a waste. And so by being part of the feature team, it enables them to see that. And so they just need the time to do that. And so this is the gold mine, basically, how to get rid of in case of if you talk about the support, for example. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a perfect sense. Sometimes these people are so far away from the team which is working on it that there is a huge amount of waste. And as soon as they start working together, they start finding to fill those gaps.
Exactly. Yeah. So a story. What happened in Port of Rotterdam, for example, is they had these pagers, and they need to be paged in the middle of the night, and they need to be opening up laptop with 3G at that time, and so they need to connect because the system cannot go down for longer than 2 hours because otherwise you have a news coverage in Netherlands. We're talking about a system which tracks ships in a harbor. It's extremely critical. Mm-hmm. So it's not a business critical. It's mission critical. It's lives basically. So so they have these 6 people which are on turn on a pager and everything. So what happened at some point when we introduced all the LeSS and feature team, etc., they were part of the team. And the guy who was paged after a long time nobody was paged, came in the morning on a Monday and start to yell at his teammates. And basically boils down to the single message: I don't want to be paged ever again. So let's now sit and figure out how to prevent that happening ever again, because I hate this thing. So I don't want to be waking up in the middle of the night. That was really a remarkable situation of the power of being in a feature team. And then they sit and they look at the situation, what actually happened, and they fix it so that it never happens again.
No shortcuts again, isn't it?
Exactly.
So I think we are at the end of this session. It has been a very powerful session. I think we all of us have learned a lot during this session. So thank you so much for being here, actually, and coming out with a lot of wisdom, actually.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I would suggest to visit the LeSS site. So here's there's also a Slack group, Twitter you can follow. So I also manage this LinkedIn group where you can actually join people, but most of the discussions happen in Slack group if you want to meet with other people in the LeSS community. So it's a quite lively community, and so I strongly suggest. On LeSS site, you can also subscribe to a newsletter, and you get all kinds of information if you want to know more.
And we would like to invite you again, isn't it?
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.